Okay, so I don't really need to introduce this panel. We will be talking about the case of Yulia Tymoshenko. We all know that this is really probably the central point right now, both in Ukrainian domestic politics and in how Ukraine is seen in the rest of the world. And probably, this is probably unprecedented to have an international group commenting on this issue, and also people on both sides from Ukraine all together. So, Viktor, thank you for this opportunity. We will first hear from Renat Kuzmin. He is the first Deputy Prosecutor General of Ukraine and therefore very directly involved in this. Прошу.
Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, I am representing here the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine, and I'm ready to answer the questions if you have any, and comment some of the circumstances which you would like to discuss. Thank you. Thank you.
Mario David, he is a member of the European Parliament, has some strong views on this issue. Mario?
Thank you very much, Christy. I was not expecting that my colleague would be so brief, because...
it's a rare quality in a Ukrainian leader,
yeah,
so...
Well, I don't know in this particular case whether there is quality or not, but honestly, I was expecting to have some introduction to the subject and to know what are the reasons, because so far I'm still very puzzled with all this with all this subject. Let me start by recalling all of us, and we are very numerous, who were here for last year. Last year, I had the opportunity to address President Yanukovych a question on this particular case, saying how sad I felt after traveling so many times to Ukraine to face myself here in such a circumstance. And honestly, I addressed the question, and let me share with you, the answer I was expecting to listen was, sorry, Mr. David, for us, justice is a different department. I'm in politics, I'm Prime Minister, I don't interfere in justice. Sorry? I'm President, yes. I don't interfere in politics. To my surprise, he's trying to mix me, yeah. So, okay, let me stand together. And then, the answer was different, as you remember. And the answer was that we are trying to find a political solution for it. I'm working with Parliament on that. And so please wait. And in short time, you'll see that things are going to change. We are going to change the criminal code, whatever you call it here. Well, 1 year has passed, and unfortunately, nothing has happened. Unfortunately, nothing was delivered. As EPP Vice President, you can imagine how sad I feel when the leader of a sister party of ours finds herself in these conditions. And we don't want, of course, to interfere in the internal issues of a country, but I think yes stands for yes for Europe. And we are a community of values, and we feel that these same values that we would like to share with Ukraine are being slashed in this process. We believe in the European Union that this process is totally political motivated, that the judgment was a mockery, allow me to use these words, that the EU standards were not fulfilled, neither in the accusation or during the trial. I want at this stage to thank President Kwasniewski and my also dear friend Pat Cox for the role that you are playing, and hope that you can have a constructive approach to this, and that finally we can get rid of this. Now, when a country asks, suppose that Ukraine would ask next Monday membership of the European Union. As you know, we have Article 49 of the treaty, so Ukrainian is a European country, would be much welcome. But there are some criteria, which we call the Copenhagen criteria. The first one being the political one, and honestly, the answer from the European Commission and the European Council would have to be, sorry folks, no, you don't fulfill the very first criterion, the political one. Unfortunately, we don't see rule of law, we don't see independence from judiciary, and passing by, I mean, I don't find it normal that being EPP Vice President and President Martens, the president of our political family, has been already twice since Julia is in jail, has been already twice in Ukraine, tried to visit her, and we were denied. Honestly, I don't think this is normal. Not in Europe, sorry. We don't think also that it's normal that the General Prosecutor walks in Europe, when I mean Europe, of course, you know that I'm talking about European Union member states, with a PR firm and trying to explain the case with the help of a PR firm. I don't think this is normal. I don't know this existing in any other country of the European Union. You have no idea, some of our Ukrainian friends, how much this is damaging the image of Ukraine, which, as was discussed this morning, and I'm sorry I could not intervene there, is no longer in the political agenda. The question of Ukraine, unfortunately, is no longer in the political agenda. Not only in the political agenda, but also in the agenda of people who wants to invest here, wants to create jobs, wants to create wellness here. I can tell you, and I can give you figures, I already know at least of 1.2 billion euros of investment that was supposed to come to Ukraine and were diverted somewhere else. And I can give you the name of the company. No, some are listed, I will not. But believe me, this is true. Now, we are approaching elections. And I'm very much afraid that these elections, as Thomas has already mentioned in a previous discussion, do not fulfill, let me talk only about Europe now, the OSCE or the Council of Europe standards. But you were absolutely right in what you said earlier on. Because elections is not only a question of election day, the polling day, no. Elections, I'm using your time. I'm very grateful you didn't talk that much so that I could use your time. Okay. But we had an order, and this order has been changed now, as I see it. We don't find it normal that the leader of the opposition is in jail, that the former Minister of the Interior is in jail, that the Minister of Environment has troubles, that the Deputy Minister of Justice has troubles, that the Minister of the Economy has got asylum in a European member state. I mean, how can we imagine that a country can dream of being a European member state in the near future when one of his ministers in the last 12 months went to a European Union member state and was granted asylum there? I think that all these people, and eventually I did not mention them all, need to have their political and their civic rights rehabilitated, that there shouldn't be, we should be sure that there is no harassment on candidates, if by no one else, at least rumors that we got from the fiscal authorities in the different districts, surprise, suddenly. And we also, Thomas already mentioned it this morning, the way that the supervision of the polling day is going to be made also raises, if nothing else, let me just call it suspicions. And the election process also is a question of freedom of speech, is a question of equal access to the media during the period. I want to try to be constructive, even if very much upset with this. And I think that with no national reconciliation, there is no way we can fulfill the EU aspirations of Ukraine. This is not a threat. We don't blackmail friends, of course, but one thing we can share is that we have no common values. forget about the association agreement, the DCFTA, forget the visas issue. This is absolutely excluded. And time is running short for Ukrainian options. And if you don't take it, we will take it on your behalf as far as we are concerned. There is one thing that I don't know if everyone in this room is really aware of. If it was not for YES, for what the network that through YES we have built with these Yalta meetings, with the Davos lunch and so on, I think that the fact that we still talk in European Union about Ukraine a lot is thanks to this network that we have built. Otherwise, it would have been completely forgotten. My last sentence, Christy, is that we, European friends of Ukraine, we will not give up seeking a democratic and prosperous Ukraine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario. It's good to know that Ukraine has friends outside Ukraine. Я тепер прошу до слова Інну Богословську.
Now I invite Inna Bohoslovska, who is an MP from the Party of Regions.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to continue what Mario was saying, and I would like to say that we will not give up and we will continue our work on reaching the standards that we selected as examples for us. And this is not a simple way, this is a long way ahead of us, and we do understand that in order to fulfill this home task, we will need at least 10-15 years. And today I've heard from my friends who were here, I've heard about this image of the minister on Euro integration of Turkey. He said that that's for us as a dietitian who says how to eat, how to live, what standards should we use in our life, and we'll be happy to do that in the future. European standards for us are the model to which we have to aspire, and we'll be doing it on the way. There will be a lot of what is not clear for countries where for 200, 300, 600 years the democratic institutions are the norm of life. We lived a short life as an independent state, and we have a very high concentration of both positive things and problems. And talking about Tymoshenko case, for our state, for our society, this case has stopped being case number one, talking about the events inside the country. Most people now think about how are we overcoming economic difficulties, how we are reforming the country. That's happening right in front of our eyes. It's difficult, it's not without the problems, but we are moving towards different standards of life than those that we had in the past. I was the head of 2 investigation commissions related to gas, and I would like to draw your attention that for the first time, the Parliament of Ukraine appointed me the head of the investigation commission in the period of gas wars, when the Parliament of Ukraine was concerned that not just Ukraine was left without gas, but Europe as well. And our parliamentary commission was doing everything to stimulate both Russian and Ukrainian side to execute the contract. But the situation was sad, because when the contract was executed, for 2 weeks, not a single civil servant in Ukraine, neither the president nor the head of the security service of Ukraine, only the Prime Minister Tymoshenko, knew which gas contract was signed. Should I speak slower? Only the Prime Minister Tymoshenko knew what are the conditions on which Ukraine for 10 years will be buying gas. And then our investigation commission asked the question about the responsibility of the government. That was back in 2009, and based on our opinion, on our conclusion, there was the meeting of the Council of Security and Defense convened at that that council was then headed by Mr. Yushchenko. And then in 2009, just think about which European country would do that. The National Security and Defense Council requested the Prime Minister Tymoshenko to show the gas contract to the state, and that contract hadn't been known to anyone in the country, including the president then. At that time, the National Security and Defense Council addressed all the law enforcement bodies about examining what were the terms of signing the contract, because no one in Ukraine knew what Tymoshenko and Putin were agreeing on during the 4 hours of negotiations, from which all the representatives of diplomatic services were no representatives of democratic services were allowed. And then when via the external intelligence service, the Ukrainian society received the text of the contract, then the conclusion was made that this contract is not in the interests of the state. We can talk much about how the friends in political parties, the friends prime ministers who for many years have been communicating with Tymoshenko as partners, as friends. We do understand your concerns, but understand us, where, in which European country you can imagine that the prime minister would fake the resolution of their own cabinet of ministers. Where can you imagine that the cabinet of ministers would refuse to approve the gas contract, and the prime minister in a different country would write the directive, would put the stamp of the cabinet of ministers, and then pretended that that was the document issued by the cabinet of ministers. Following the way we are offered a few basic things, I would request you to discuss, because I'm sure that here we have our friends, people who want to make good for Ukraine, and we want it very much. We talked to Mario before, and I believe that we managed to present some additional arguments when we met in your office. The documents to the investigation commission of the parliament, the documents confirming that the case of Tymoshenko is not about political decision. Political decision is the decision passed within the competences of the political figure. If Tymoshenko, according to the competences of the prime minister, had the right to sign such directives, if she would have signed them, but the contract would have been harmful for Ukraine, then we would be able to say that that's a political mistake, and for such a violation, the prime minister should be only politically responsible. But in our situation, it was the situation that when the only body that had the right to make decision about such a contract was the cabinet of ministers, and the cabinet of ministers refused to pass and to approve this contract, and Tymoshenko had no right to make a decision instead of the cabinet of ministers. And knowing that, knowing the constitution, knowing the law on the cabinet of ministers, the prime minister Tymoshenko faked the directives of the cabinet of ministers. She forced her subordinate to sign the contract from which he was refusing, and then Ukraine every year is paying over $6 billion for the gas contracts. I would like to note one more thing so that we can talk about essential things, that we are not just discussing the stereotypes which were imposed by our colleagues.
$6 billion, this is by 1 billion more than all our spendings on the Euro affair, Euro 2012. This is the price of the criminal offense with a fraud committed by the Prime Minister of Ukraine against the Cabinet of Ministers. If we can make a parallel with any European Prime Minister, I would like you to give any illustration of such a case study when prime ministers in EU countries fake decisions of their own cabinet of ministers.
Спасибо вам.
Thank you very much.
We do also hope to hear eventually from Mr. Kuzmin, but it was good to hear the case laid out. And we will now hear from Hryhoriy and Nemyrya.
Yeah, I believe it was Mark Twain who said, you get your facts first and then distort them as much as you want. But really, I would like to thank you, the Yes who started at the meeting of only 24 people and declared part of his mission a noble goal to open Ukraine towards Europe. And I think the spirit of the openness values, especially of this time. And I would like to suggest to put case, which is called now in the program Tymoshenko case, in a context of pattern of contempt for law. But before, I would like to ask those who are present here to raise your hands, those who believe that Tymoshenko trial was fair and that it was based on the rule of law. Please raise your hands, those who believe. One. Two. Okay. How many people in this room? 200? Okay. May I continue? May I continue? Okay. Minister, can I continue? You was in the panel and you are sitting there. Why you change your seat? So Yulia's case is best understood in the context of a pattern of contempt for law. It started when the constitutional procedures were neglected and the fake majority in the parliament was formed. Many of you remember the 1st of October in 2010, here in this room, in the presence of President Yanukovych, but at that time, our constitution was junked and the old constitution was resurrected. With this constitution emasculated to extent never imagined before, the legal system was ripe to be twisted in the way it was to convict Yulia Tymoshenko. My major line of thought has to do with a full and outrageous ignorance of the basic principles of presumption of innocence. This is in the fundamental of the major principle that makes countries European, namely the rule of law. Countless officials, starting from President, Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, First Deputy Prosecutor General, were traveling abroad and loudly announcing that Tymoshenko is guilty even before the trial was completed. The right decisions, and that's why I consider this case political. Right decisions, usually when time's going on, broaden the options. Wrong decisions narrow them. That's why we found ourselves in the situation when Ukraine now really at the crossroads. But what happened after? It was a year ago here in this palace that President Yanukovych indicated that this tragedy came as a result of the existence of the law, Stalinist law, inherited since the time of the Soviet Ukraine. And he will do his job to make sure that rather sooner than later the law will be amended to avoid the major, not just diplomatic fiasco, but political fiasco inside the country. Now you, Mr. Kuzmin, trumpet loudly that Yulia guilty in other cases that have not gone to the trial. In any normal democracy, if the state behaved in so outrageous manner, an independent judge would simply throw the case out of the court because of the prejudice this state has engendered for the accused. Instead, Ukraine's judges, no surprise, parrot their masters. And now the question to be asked. And also I want, as Minister, in a way, provoke me, that, and you pride yourself, and I think you have the reason to do, as a professional. And as you remember, when you was appointed a Ukraine's ambassador in Moscow, I congratulated you publicly, saying that this is professional, as Gryhorchenko may bring what is needed to improve our relationships. Can you, Minister Gryhorchenko, name another foreign minister who has traveled the world proclaiming a guilt of a former prime minister of his country before a court has even ruled? Can you imagine a Hillary Clinton, a Guido Westerwelle, or Carl Bildt doing this? The answer is clear: not. That's one more example that the case from the very beginning was politically motivated. And I would rather call our panel not a Tymoshenko case, but a Yanukovych case. Victor, you suggested at the beginning to be inspired, to try to be inspired this piece of the modern art. The team in the blue and yellow colors. And you gave your vision, your explanation of the symbolism it involves. I suggest a different. Yes, the colors Ukrainian, no doubts. There is even a fat man standing in front and overseeing the team. On their uniform, it's even team spirit. If you count the numbers, it's exactly the numbers of the members of the cabinet of ministers. But it looks like they're not trying to refuel the car or change the tires, but rather to steal them. If one could go further, and I really appreciate, I remember at the yesterday night this paradigm of being on the cross of the invention, technical engineering, and art. The other symbolism, which I would like to suggest, for car to move forward, maybe it's not tires that should be changed, or fuel to fill in, but this is the pilot who has to be changed. And I really want to understand a very important human thing. I was a member of the cabinet where Yulia Tymoshenko was prime minister. I was interrogated for the first time in my life by the subordinates of Mr. Kuzmin. Security officers banged in my door in my apartment in my absence, where my old mother and my small daughter was there. When the trial began, you, Minister, was among those 38 witnesses that the prosecutor asked the judge to call. All of them, including you, were called, and you received the right to present your witnesses. Only 2 out of 36 witnesses asked to be called by the defense were called, not me. Is this a fair trial or not? Final thing, because this is the conference where we're talking about European aspirations. I think 5 ministers, some time ago, ministers of foreign affairs, did an excellent job, service to Ukrainian people, to help them to understand the developments. And among those 5 ministers, Carl Bildt, they said, association agreement, угода про вільну торгівлю, imprisoned in the Kachanivska prison. This is the answer to open the way towards the Europe. One should stop political persecution of opposition. Yulia Tymoshenko and Yuri Lutsenko should be released. Within this context, elections could be considered free and fair according to the OSCE and the Council of Europe standards. And last but not least, finally, the real reform should start, not the imagined one, beginning with the independent judiciary. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hryhoriy. I'm now going to call on a couple of people who are very engaged in this matter. And then I will let people ask questions. Now, the only bad news is we have to end at 5 p.m. sharp because we have Jose Manuel Barroso on a video link, and so that's a time that we can't move. So I really would like to hear from a lot of people. Please be succinct. I'm going to start with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Konstantin Hryhoriy. His name has been raised quite a few times in this discussion. Please, Minister.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, and I must simply make a few notes. First, it's always easier to be in opposition. I was in opposition. Hryhoriy Nemyrya was traveling the world. He was Vice Prime Minister, and he had nothing to say about any results of his government. I was so happy because it was so easy to criticize his government. It's always easier to criticize the government in place. Now coming to this particular situation on Yulia Tymoshenko. I do believe that everything needs to be decided within the legal framework. That's what it's all about. We do have a system where the case goes from one stage to another and then to European Court. And if you despise the judge, you don't believe in the court system that you presided over as Prime Minister, you don't have the case to complain because you had all the opportunities to change it. You never did. I never traveled the world to send the message of Yulia guilt or unguilt. What I did was to defend the national interests of my country that you would like to tarnish, to defeat because of a particular case. For me, Yulia, yourself, myself, is an important factions, elements, where everything needs to be judged through the system which has constitutional and legal basis. But what is important for me as a head of the foreign ministry is the future of this country. You try to destroy it now, or at least to make sure that it will be delayed. Delayed because of a singular, maybe for you important issue. But for this country, what is important is where we'll be in a year, 2 or 3. Much has been done in these couple of years after 2010. Many changes inside the country. But what I would like also to stress, which brings us very much closer to European standards, including changes to the procedural code, criminal procedural, and many others. What I dislike and don't share with you is the desire to personalize what you dislike. It is not exactly what I believe a European politician should do. Because what we are doing, we are working for the future of Ukraine. And that also means responsibility of everyone sitting here, whoever and whatever his position is, for what he does, whether he does it accordingly to the law, whether he really believes in procedure, because procedure is democracy, it's part of it. Don't avoid the question. The question is very clear. Whether the law was really violated at that time. It's not my answer. I only, again, relate to the outside world what was the decision of Ukrainian court. And that's my job. It's not my mission. It's something I have to do. And I will do it whether it will be my next door neighbor, my good friend, Victor for himself, or anyone else. If the court will judge them as guilty, I will say that I believe that it is something I need to support. On the other hand, let me also say, yes? The only thing that I believe is true is, Hryhoriy, I do not believe that you have done anything yet. Anything that would place you in any situation where I would have to have your name on the issues that you would like to discuss today. Because you are dealing with issues which are of political nature. And the case is not about policies. It's about criminal responsibility. Last thing. Can we simply say that it is unique to Ukraine? Can we really say that other prime ministers, heads of governments, are not now facing the need to answer questions for their deeds in many of the nations? Can we really say that it is something which should be seen as immunity for the head of government of a state? I believe that the answer should be given within the framework of the Council of Europe, which is now working very hard on delineating the criminal and political responsibility. And let me give you something. It's the most difficult issue which is now facing the Council of Europe. Because in some countries it's one approach, in another it's another. We have our legislation which was enacted before us, your government, but you never wanted to change it. You should live by these particular laws. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister Hryhoriy. No, I'm gonna. Ні, досить, ні, перепрошую, всі хочуть маленький коментарі.
Everyone wants to make a small comment. I'm sorry. Please pass on the microphone. I'm sorry, Carl Bildt. No, please, Carl Bildt, go ahead. Sorry, that's enough. Sorry, thanks.
I'd like to hear from you. And I would just like to point out that our first Deputy Prosecutor General asked for questions. So if you'd like to ask him a question, feel free to do so.
I have one question, although not necessarily to him, but first a reflection. I've been Prime Minister of my country as well. And I negotiated extremely important international treaties. Sometimes I did it all by myself. And therefore I listened very, very carefully to the description. Laws might be different, but nothing of that would be in the, if assuming all of that is true, which I take for granted, nothing of that would be in the vicinity of criminal responsibility. There would have been a political debate around it, needless to say, in my country. The only possible legal consequence I could see, if I, as Prime Minister, has exceeded my authority and signed a document where I didn't have authority, was that that document would not have been valid. So in Sweden, the only thing that would have happened is that the contract would not have been valid. No criminal responsibility, extensive political debates. And I think that would be roughly the way, assuming this is correct, it would have been in other European countries. My question. Ms. Tymoshenko is now in prison, as we know, and there are sort of very strict rules for what she can do and not do, and visitors. She is allowed to see visitors for 4 hours every month. What happened in the last few days is that she has asked to see me. It wasn't me who wanted to go here. I had nothing against it, but initiative from her side, within the 4-hour monthly allocation, she wanted to spend a couple of minutes with me in accordance with, and we checked all the regulations, all of the regulations that are there, because we don't want to do anything that is contrary to the regulations of the country. We don't do that. Now we've been informed by you that the Minister of Foreign Affairs doesn't allow it, or informs us that in spite of everything done by the regulations within the 4 hours, it's refused.
read the note.
I have read the note.
The note shows that...
Could you pass him the microphone, please?
Sorry. It says that, well, it might be the penitentiary system. I don't know if it's the penitentiary system, Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's from my point of view, the Ukrainian authorities. But it was a request completely, when we read the documents, within the legal framework and the framework of the detailed regulations, and still the message is no. Whether it's the Minister of Foreign Affairs or someone else.
So, Minister Hryhoriy, would you like to answer this? Why not let Carl Bildt? He's such a nice guy.
He's, well, obviously. If Carl Bildt wants to go to Kharkiv, to see the beautiful city, and to see the most developed institution that he wishes to see, and as far as the foreign ministry, we are all for that. You will have the best possible, protocol support you need to get it. But as you understand, the foreign ministry does not run prisons. It does not really do things, not yet with yourself. When you are on top of it, you will not. And by the way, making these kind of remarks does not make you very much European. It makes you just like, someone who is coming from the streets of a... Yes, you are, and that really shows. It's not exactly how you do it. Hryhoriy, be European.
Okay.
Anyway, being.
Okay.
In that sense, I would like simply to make sure that we would do our utmost to make sure that you have this opportunity.
Yeah, after he has left. Yes. Great.
Mario, you wish to go there as well?
Yeah, I asked you last year. Yes.
Who else would like to? Let's make a compound. Let's make a major. But you should also understand that there are laws which we need to follow.
In the end of the day, it's the doctors who don't allow it, right?
Okay, I'm going to let Tom Nemyrya make a remark about this, and then we'll see where we are. Yeah, okay, let's...
Stepping back to where we were throughout the day, or earlier in the day, talking about Ukraine's relationship with Europe and the democratic West, I'm reminded that Ukraine has demonstrated that it can hold competitive elections according to democratic standards that instill the confidence of the Ukrainian people and the international community. They've done that in several elections, leading up to and including the election 2.5 years ago when President Yanukovych was elected in a very closely contested election. Since then, however, there's been one national election, the local elections of autumn of 2010, and now the present parliamentary election season, in which there are more and more questions being called to the forefront about the quality of the election process. One of the significances of the Tymoshenko case, along with her other colleagues who are in prison on what appear to us in the United States government to be politically motivated prosecutions, is that it looks like it's taking legitimate major political contenders out of the race. If that was the only thing that was happening in this election context, it might be isolatable. But it comes in a context in which there are other questions about the quality of the election process. And so, as I mentioned earlier in the day, the limited access to media, broadcast media, by opposition parties, the way that the election commissions have been formed and people are being switched out by one party for another after the lottery. There's a number of things that begin to raise questions, and so this comes in that context, and I think that Ukrainians, know that we as outsiders don't take any joy in pointing these things out. As I said, we want Ukraine to succeed. We want this to be a successful election process. I think there's several things that yet need to be done for it to cross that threshold before October 28th. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Now, at the very beginning, the first Deputy Prosecutor General of Ukraine said that he was open to responding to statements and questions. I think we've just heard from Tom two very direct questions that it would be great to hear the response to. The first is that it is the view of the United States government that the prosecution of Yulia Tymoshenko has been politically motivated. I think we heard the same thing from Carl Bildt. So that's the first question. Is that the case? Second question from Carl. Yulia Tymoshenko has asked to see Carl Bildt. The Swedish diplomats, who are excellent, believe this is fully within Ukrainian law. Why is this being forbidden? Two specific questions. We'd love to hear your answer.
I've heard so many questions. I put some of them down, and I'd like to address all of them. At least I'll try to. Please be attentive. Before I come to the essence of the matter, to the crux of the matter, I would like to draw attention to the fact that I can hardly be called a proponent of any party, including the Party of Regions. And I was appointed to this high position in the prosecutor's office, not by the President Yanukovych's administration. I was first appointed prosecutor under President Kuzmin, then under President Yushchenko, and I became the first deputy prosecutor general when Yulia Tymoshenko was prime minister, Yuri Lutsenko was the minister of interior, and Yushchenko was the president. And I continued to work in the prosecutor general's office. And it is my task to prosecute crime, to investigate and prosecute crime. And external contacts, foreign contacts of the Prosecutor General's office are also within my purview, within the purview of my responsibilities. I would like to draw your attention, ladies and gentlemen, to the fact that I first traveled abroad, not on my own initiative, not just because I wanted to see sites in Europe, but because I, as the chair or the chief of the investigative department, was invited by one of the leaders of the European Parliament just to listen to the information from the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office. After all Europe was flooded with false information presented to them by Yulia Tymoshenko's defense. I think there was so much negative information traveling around Europe that European parliamentarians, the European Parliament members, decided to invite the person who is inside this case and can comment on it. That's how I come to find myself in the European Parliament. I spoke there twice. Both times on the invitation of the European Parliament. I also was invited by members of national parliaments to talk there, to give talks there. Politicians want to know the truth, but the truth is bilateral, or you have to know the truth, you have to know the positions of both parties. And I commented on the essence of the matters raised and subjects raised. I am the prosecutor. I represent a state prosecution. I am not Tymoshenko's defense counsel. So you cannot expect that I would be defending her and that I would be speaking in her defense, because by law, by the force of law, I represent the state prosecution. Presumption of innocence. As a lawyer myself, I know pretty well what is the notion behind this term, and I am very responsible in everything I say. I've always respected the principle of the presumption of innocence, and I will repeat here what I said in the European Parliament. The Prosecutor General's office has enough grounds and reasons to charge Yulia Tymoshenko with on new allegations. to press new charges to Yulia Tymoshenko. I can understand the position of Yulia Tymoshenko's defense. They have different motives, political and personal. Some person aspires to become a foreign minister, somebody wants to be a member of parliament, somebody wants to become the prosecutor general of this country, or the public attorney, if you wish. But I have always said, and I continue to argue, that the resolution about releasing Tymoshenko from prison is within the purview of the judiciary of Ukraine. No political statements, no political mottos, blackmailing or threats can bring about positive decision in this case. And the only possible solution to this issue, to this problem, lies within the realm of law of the judiciary. Not a single member of parliament can come to prison and open up the doors and release the inmate. Not a single president, including the president of the European Parliament, can do that. It is within the powers of a court. And I would like to remind you about the need to address this issue legally within the framework of the law. And the only person guilty of the situation that the former prime minister is in prison is the defense, who failed to win this case. Instead of defending the client with the legal and juridical instruments and tools, they opted for political methods and techniques, political mottos, political provocation, and political allegations. I would like to draw your attention to the principles that the Roman law was based on, and remind you about the crime which was believed to be a grave offense in ancient Rome, to encourage the people to come against the judicial decisions was a very grave offense. As a prosecutor general, I sometimes dislike some of the court decisions when court did not support the prosecutor's proposal or the prosecutor's conclusions. I can give you an example of a court decision when many people disagreed with the court decisions. For example, the so-called third turn in elections, presidential elections, when Yushchenko was elected. There are a lot of contentious court decisions in American courts, for example, those pertaining to the case of Dominic Strauss-Kahn. But court decisions are binding, and nobody can challenge them, particularly so given that the form in which those decisions were assessed and commented was obscene. We see some politicians despising Ukraine, just calling names, and I cannot imagine a European politician who would use such terminology, such slang in talking in their parliaments, calling the presidential power and judicial power in the manner that our members of parliament afford themselves to use. And the last thing I would like to tell you, nobody entitled anyone to disrespect the state. Nobody can accuse the entire state system, the entire judiciary system, of being criminal. I will remind you about the presumption of innocence. I will just retaliate this accusation or allegation. We are going to press new charges against the former prime ministers, and some materials that we require for that are in the United States of America. So I would like to call on the representatives of the American state and government please do your best for the representatives of the investigation group of the Prosecutor General's office to be able to go to the United States of America to cooperate with FBI and with the Attorney General's office to investigate the crime committed in Ukraine by the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Lazarenko. We want to participate in questioning that person, in questioning Major Melnichenko. Please facilitate this process for us to establish the truth. Thank you very much for your attention. Should you have any additional questions, I'm ready to answer them.
As fate would have it, the European TV genies clearly want us to talk about this a bit more. The TV link is delayed, so we have 5 more minutes that we can talk. But it's only 5 more minutes, so I'll take 3 or 4 questions in a row, and then we'll see who wants to answer them. Okay, please, I promised my colleague Conrad a question.
Thanks a lot.
And please, very succinct questions, everybody, okay?
Okay. Mr. Deputy Prosecutor General, I have the rare occasion to agree with you on what you said, court decisions are binding. Now, we are going to have a court, and there's a court decision imminent on the case of Hryhoriy Lutsenko at the European Court of Human Rights, which in first instance found elements of arbitrariness in the course of justice in regard to Mr. Lutsenko. Now, I know that your government has appealed against that, but if the final decision should uphold the finding that there were elements of arbitrariness, and considering that you are a gentleman and probably a patriot, would it not be your duty to take consequences and to offer your resignation? And would it not be the duty of the relevant authorities of Ukraine to consider whether investigations in this case might be necessary against those people who might then be responsible for arbitrary elements in the process, and might it be that you might be one of the persons against whom these investigations might be directed?
Дуже пряме питання. Просимо до відповіді.
It's a very direct question, so we would like you to answer.
Thank you very much. I can feel that you know the Ukrainian legislation profoundly well, and of course the EU law. So I would like to ask you, are you a lawyer by any chance?
Professionalist. I'm a journalist.
Well, journalism is a professional field, very important and responsible. And I know enough about journalism because my first education was in journalism, and my mom was a TV journalist. I know this job very well, but also know very well the lawyer's work. And it is easier for me to speak along the lines of law with a lawyer, not a journalist. But I will give you an answer as far as I can be concise and simple. If there's a finding that there's an arbitrary action on behalf of any official, we will do anything and everything important to hold this person liable. And if the court will recognize arbitrary actions in some prosecutor or judge, our reaction will be well measured and responsive.
Chatham House. I'm Ukrainian citizen living abroad, and I hear a lot of discussions everywhere. I think one of the problems of this discussion is very quickly, the side of Ukrainians who are independent is not represented in this discussion. And I have a very short list of 3 things, very short.
Just question, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, but I think it's important to say what independent, because we have parties represented here. We have one political party and another political party. The question is, if you can name me 2 things that the prosecution of Yulia Tymoshenko gave for the future of Ukraine, because I would like to give 3 things that did stop for Ukraine. No, it's the rule by law, it's also isolation on the international level, and it's also the fact that now we have...
Я перепрошую, кожна людина хоче своє
Every person
заявлення
wants
робити.
to make its own statement. All of them want to do so.
Okay, please, do you have a question? Ему было интересно.
So I'm among those friends of Ukraine from Europe who followed Ukrainian story since 1988 by chance, since the very beginning of the video we saw earlier. And then since 2004, I'm following the elections. I met already, or still, Mr. Kuzmin in power, and then I saw all changes. So for me, it was very, very important to believe that elections in Ukraine are meanwhile free, fair and independent. So therefore, me and others, because we have been convinced that this is the case, we fought first with Mrs. Tymoshenko, later on with the colleagues of you, Mr. Hryhoriy, for the association agreement. Can you really believe that we can, with all our forces, fight for the association agreement if we see such a fall back in time and in system as we see it with these political cases? And please, if you do not want that we only speak about Mrs. Tymoshenko, give us not the names of the cases, only the cases Mario listed, but give us all the cases from the mayors, the civil servants, far away somewhere in smaller cities in Ukraine, which are prosecuted since change of power. So I feel frightened about this development. I feel also hurt, and I feel responsible because I did not recognize this development early enough. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, that's a very good direct question. I think the best person to answer it is the Foreign Minister of Ukraine.
Well, thank you for this. And I do believe that we need to work together to really bring Ukraine to Europe. Let me simply remind all of us. 2005, 18,000 people, 18,000 people summarily lost their jobs, mostly, including up to the level of teachers, in the aftermath of the change of government. 18,000 people in the country. Who remembers that? Who really raised the voice in that particular situation? Nothing like that happened after the change of government in 2010. We really do make decisions based on very negative experience before, because that led to the loss of professionalism, of ability to really decide things on local level. We are not talking about ministers. For ministers, fine, it's normal. Even for deputy ministers. 18,000 people summarily during few months simply lost their jobs. Was it normal? Was it something which is European? We are changing, we are making really decisions based on both negative and positive experience. You know, in 2002 and before, the members of government were, you know, driving the cars with a lot of signals, like in Moscow, for example. Now nobody is signaling anything. And, you know, as compared to many other countries, it's different. It is something, again, small things. As we talk about elections, we are very much committed to make sure that the elections will be done in a manner that would meet best possible practices. Let me remind you that for the first time, we have invited all the possible observers from every possible country to come to Ukraine well before established timelines. They can stay for whatever timeline. We create a basis for very clear verification of the process per se. It is also a very clear opportunity for the political forces to engage in political debate. Is it an ideal situation? It is not. It is a competition. In competition, especially in one district, circuit, always people try to do their utmost to push the package to the utmost. But overall, the country is very much committed to have very democratic and very transparent elections that could be verified by thousands, and I hope you will come as well this time to verify elections, and this time as well. And that will be very helpful together with everyone who is sitting here. Let me invite on behalf of government everyone who is sitting here to come to observe our elections, because they will be just, transparent, democratic, and meeting all the European standards. And I am very much convinced in that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll take 2 more questions, then we'll have final statements. I feel the depression that falls upon me whenever this matter is discussed. Okay, 1 more question, please.
Marcin Święcicki. The government is saying about the priority to approach European Union, and the Yulia Tymoshenko case seems to be one of the obstacles. So can I ask Ms. Bohoslovska, why Party of Regions didn't support the legislation that would remove from the penal code this article, Stalinist article about the criminal responsibility for government acts? And maybe the question to Deputy Prosecutor, would this be enough
would that be enough? Okay.
Would this be enough, yes, to release Yulia from at least these accusations?
Okay, that's 2 good, direct questions.
Спасибо большое за вопрос. В самом вопросе есть...
Thank you very much. There's an answer in your question. It is not a Stalinist article. You were misled by the opposition. A similar and identical article is contained in 11 criminal codes of 11 EU members and 4 accession countries. In the European Union, there's no uniform approach to criminalization of this situation, and we had a special resolution of the Ukrainian parliament, and we called upon parliaments of other countries, and we dispatched our resolutions with the checklist of EU member countries with the identical offenses criminalized by their codes. In Germany and France and the UK, there are no such articles, but in 11 countries of the EU, and the EU does not make any claim. And I would like to draw attention, ladies and gentlemen, to Greco, the group that is responsible for fighting corruption. For the 3rd time in a row, the yellow card was shown to Germany because they wanted them to criminalize such abuse of office. And I would like to remind you that Germany has failed to sign the Anti-Corruption Convention of the UN. So when Europeans say to us, bring your code into compliance with the EU law, we looked into the law in much detail, and we are asking you, when Europe will be in compliance with one single standard in the EU countries, then we'll be prepared to say that we also are prepared to exclude this article. It is present in the criminal codes of 11 EU members and 4 candidates for accession.
Barroso is now ready for us. I'm going to let Hryhoriy have just one sentence, Hryhoriy, okay?
I would like to thank everybody who make possible this panel. And I wish that one of the tests for the commitment of the government that we just heard from Foreign Minister, that like that panel could take place in the course of the TV debate on the major TV channels. And you will not continue to pressure channels that are more balanced and independent out of media space. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's move from Ukraine's most painful problems. Perhaps we can question him about Europe's most painful problems. Дякуємо вам. Ви можете вже відійти, якщо ви хочете. Можете тут слухати Barroso. Here, we're going to see him now. Here he is. Hello. Thank you very much for joining us.
Can I speak to you now?
Yes.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. I am very glad to have the opportunity to speak to this 9th Yalta European Strategy Conference on the very important theme of how to address tomorrow's challenges together, Ukraine and the European Union. I see many friends in the audience. Let me send them my best greetings. Ukraine, the European Union and the world, we are all facing very important challenges which cannot be tackled any longer in an isolated manner. Not only the integration of financial markets, but other important issues from energy security, transnational crime. All these issues require a coordinated and cooperative approach amongst the countries in general and here in Europe in special. And I believe that together we are stronger to overcome these challenges. The European Union and Ukraine have been working together successfully on many issues, from addressing the consequences of the Chernobyl accident to the modernization of our economies and the joint efforts to help settle the Transnistria conflict. These are just a few examples. This is economically necessary as well as politically indispensable. And we will be ever more effective in our common endeavor if we espouse the same principles and values: respect for democracy, rule of law, fundamental freedoms. This is why the European Union remains firmly committed to advancing the relationship with Ukraine. We are very sincere about this. We want Ukraine closer and closer to us, and we want us to be closer and closer to Ukraine. That is why we have proposed political association and economic integration to Ukraine. This would not only consolidate and reinforce Ukraine's independence and democracy, as well as provide for significant new economic opportunities with market openings for Ukrainian products and services and for the prosperity of all Ukrainians. It would also contribute to widespread economic growth. Additional European investments and trade would create new business opportunities and jobs. Ultimately, our societies would be brought closer together. The hard work on the framework that would make this possible has been done. We have finalized the most advanced association agreement the European Union has ever envisaged with a third partner. We also have provided an action plan which sets out what has to be done to liberalize the visa regime. These are unprecedented steps in the strengthening of our relations. So the way ahead is clearly marked out, but we still miss, and I have to say it very frankly, we still miss the political conditions to be able to take the next important step, which is to sign the agreement. The current polarized atmosphere of Ukrainian politics is not conducive to a favorable solution. We need a firm sense of responsibility from Ukraine's political establishment to work on the basis of our common values, primarily in the areas of justice and freedoms. I regret that the consequence of trials whose conduct fell short of international standards will prevent two important leaders of the opposition, Mrs. Tymoshenko and Mr. Lutsenko, from standing in parliamentary elections. They need to be given the chance of a fair and transparent trial. The elections of 28th of October will be a litmus test for the country's future and its attachment to democracy. I'm happy that the OSCE ODIHR election observation mission has already started its activities in Ukraine, and I hope that the government will continue to engage with the mission and swiftly follow up on its findings. The conduct of these elections will have to meet Ukraine's commitments towards the OSCE, ensuring a level playing field for all candidates. To this end, freedom of assembly and expression, including unbiased access to media, is indeed essential. I have said many times that Ukraine is an important partner for the European Union, an important member of our Eastern Partnership. I am committed to continue to work for the deepening of our relations, but the intensity of our cooperation will be determined by the intensity of Ukraine's commitment to our values and to reforms. We have a jointly agreed association agenda, providing for critical reform measures in a whole range of areas. This has the potential to decisively move ahead our relations. This has the potential to positively affect the daily lives of millions of Ukrainians, and this will be critical to our ability to continue to work together to address tomorrow's challenges. So this is my contribution to your work. It's a pity I cannot be there in person to discuss with you. I'm speaking here from Germany, where I came also to another conference, but let me, from here, from Germany, to wish you all the best for your debates here about the future of Ukraine and the future of relationships with the European Union. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, President Barroso. He wasn't officially part of the Yulia Tymoshenko panel, but as you can see, the case of Yulia and of Lutsenko is very much also on the mind of Mr. Barroso. So the Ukrainian government officials here, I hope they are taking note of that. Thank you very much. We also will see he's being interviewed by other people. So Mr. Barroso is off for a break. We have one too. Please come back at 5:45. Yeah, 5:45? And that's our last panel. So there's just one more to go. Yes.